Hello everybody, welcome back to day 25 of Sound Design September. Today I have a few more atmospheres for you. So as always, I built a little demo and it sounds like this. Now I can imagine that in a section like this you would have a lot more sounds, but this is actually from a production that I'm currently working on. And this is just a stripped down version of that project where I'm able to just put in the synths and all of that stuff that I want to actually show you in these videos. But you can hear that we get like a nice base layer of atmosphere that we can then put extra sounds on top. And in this case that is achieved with 4 different atmospheres. We have this plucky one over here that repeats every bar. Then we have this one over here, which is based on a very specific wavetable. We have another one over here, which is a little bit more general. You can also hear that it has a little bit of a different texture. And then we have this final one over here, which is that pitch sliding one. So starting off with the first one, what we'll see over here is that this is actually a modified version of the patch that I made in day 15 of Sound Design September. So you can already see that I'm starting to use the presets that I'm already making. And really the only thing that is different about this preset is that we have a much longer release here. And I believe, but I'm not quite sure, that we have set a higher time as well as a higher mix here. Maybe we've also changed some of the parameters over here for the delay. I would need to go actually back into the patch to see what the real differences are, but as I'm currently doing something, I'm recording a video, I really don't want to do that. So you can just copy over these settings over here, as well as this stuff over here from the episode 15, and then just see where the differences are. Either way, I am going to explain what is going on in this patch though, because it is serving as a nice refresher. What we're essentially doing is we're taking this triangle wave here and we're generating a very strong like pitch click, which you can see over here. And that makes sure that we get a lot of frequencies basically everywhere in the spectrum, because this has a few harmonics and they are moving really fast through the spectrum. So this filter is always going to be triggered here by this resonance. This resonance is set too low to actually self-oscillate, so it wouldn't otherwise trigger if there isn't any like frequency material actually in this peak. But this generates that really distinct kind of tonal information that we want. And then we just process that mainly by washing it out and removing some of the lower frequencies of it over here. And then really the delay and reverb is what is actually responsible for the actual atmosphere of the sound. So you can hear that without it, it's just like a plug. It doesn't really become an atmosphere until the delay and reverb is added to it. The cool thing about this atmosphere is that it's naturally a very rhythmical sound because it doesn't really have like an attack stage to it. And since we're triggering it every bar in this example here, you really just get a nice indication of where the bar is within the groove of the track. Most of these other atmospheres don't really do that. So as you can see over here, we have an atmosphere that uses these burp wavetables. These actually come from volume 3, I believe, or volume 2 here of the side tables by Psytrance. Now this may mean that when it comes to actually giving you guys these presets, which is something that I do over on my Patreon page, but because this patch actually is from the production and it includes like a product of somebody else, I would need to ask him if I could put this patch up on the Patreon. If not, it's only going to be the other 3 patches, and if I do get permission, then all 4 patches are going to be available up on my Patreon. Yeah, but this patch really is just the wavetable playing, and one of the interesting things that I am doing, however, is playing 2 octaves. You can see both of them also have 2 voices of unison and a little bit of detune. And then in terms of effects, you can see that there's nothing really there. We don't have any modulations in here because I'm just automating the wavetable position. So you can see that it's just going up over time. So it's literally just very slowly playing the wavetable. And because of the properties of this wavetable being literal like bird sounds, we actually get the bird sounds out of that. And then you can see we process that with a little bit of delay. We remove the low frequencies from it, and then we give it a substantial amount of reverb. So you can see a length of 4 seconds and quite a bit of dry wet. And that is really what is responsible for the atmospheric sound of this patch. Now, of course, if you don't have this kind of wavetable, one of the interesting things that you could do is maybe experiment with some granular synthesis, or you can take samples like this, like these kind of ambiances, and kind of stretch them up. Maybe that is something that we'll have a look at later on in this video as well. But you can imagine that I cannot really say much more about this patch because it's literally just the wavetable being responsible for the type of sound that you're going to get. In the next case, that isn't really the case though. We are relying on an external effect here, which is the frequency shifter. But most DAWs come with a frequency shifter, so that shouldn't really be a problem. Now you can see that the patch itself is just a saw wave going through a bandpass filter. So we're just trying to get a very small tonal part of the sound. And the filter cutoff is actually going to be automated while the sound is playing. And again, we have no effects and no internal modulations because this patch really is just a setup for the main trick here. And that is going to be the frequency shifter. Now you can see that both of the automations are doing interesting things in that they're both moving up and down kind of like randomly. But you can hear without the frequency shifter, it really doesn't like change away from the saw wave. And it's just that familiar saw wave sound. There's another automation on here that has to do with the volume. This is because it's from the production. Let's turn that off for this example. But you can hear that with the frequency shifter, we're really trying to get away from the main saw wave tonality. Of course, where it's going to go through like a frequency of 0, somewhere over here where it's really just in the center. There we're going to get it momentarily back, but you can hear that by doing this, we get some really cool new tonalities out of the sound. Now, what is interesting about this patch is that if you think about what is happening in theory, we're generating this really small portion of a saw wave that is moving up and down through the frequency spectrum with this bandpass over here. And then we're moving it up and down in the frequency spectrum with this frequency shifter over here. So we're basically taking a sound and moving it up and down into the spectrum in 2 different ways, both with which set of harmonics from this saw wave is going to be actually be played, which is actually going to be attenuated by this bandpass over here. And then also, how far away from their original frequency are they going to be shifted with this frequency shifter over here. And then after that, all we have to do is introduce the actual atmospheric part of the sound, because before the delay and reverb, it isn't really much of an atmosphere. It's just like one tone moving through the frequency spectrum. So that's not really that interesting, but of course with the delay and the reverb that we have over here, which in this case is a very big reverb, you can see that this is part of the huge spaces category of the Emm Turbo reverb. So this is really a big kind of reverb, and that is of course kind of what we want with a sound like this, because we're generating something atmospheric. That is also why this is one of the rare cases where it makes sense to set a dry wet which is over 50%. Of course, in the real world, you cannot really have a reflection that is louder than the sound that caused the reflection. But in the case of sound design, this is a really good way to really generate that overly broom feeling, which is really what we're going for with an atmosphere. We want to create this kind of big space that is either like flowing in or flowing out or whatever you want to do with it. In this case, it is just there to do some random movement. But with the room being louder than the sound itself, we're obviously going to get this exaggerated, like overly atmospheric feeling. And that is again the reason why in this last patch what you'll see is a dry wet which is set higher. You can also see that we're automating this dry wet, so this dry wet actually goes up to 100% towards the end here. It starts a lot lower, but it goes up over time. And this is an interesting thing that I sometimes like to do, which is just giving the atmosphere a really long time to kind of present itself. So you also see that the delay of the dry wet is increasing over time. And we also have the same thing with the stereo width, as well as, I believe, the feedback. No, the feedback is staying the same here. Again, this is from our production, so this is a little bit of a mess for me. But we can just ignore the feedback over here. That is not really automated, because it's always at 80%. And the patch itself is actually super, super simple here. If we go into it, we can see that it's just one sine wave that is being panned left to right over here. You can see there's a little bit more going on with these LFOs than I initially expected, to be honest. Because what I believe I'm doing is I'm using LFO1 to determine where there's going to be this panning effect over here. And this is unsynced. So what is happening is we're using this to actually determine the rate of that. Meaning that we're really just interested in this part over here, because that is where the panning effect is going to take place. So really, it's just an interesting way of getting a little bit more of a rhythmic sound into the atmosphere, I guess. Even though this isn't necessarily tied to the rhythm of the beat. To be honest, I don't even hear it now. I didn't expect this to be here, because when I was auditioning the sound, I didn't really hear that. I still don't hear it. Maybe it's because this is coming in over here. You can hear a slight panning from left to right in there, but really it's not doing that much, because the main idea of this sound, to be honest, is just a sine wave pitching down over time, and that is achieved with the pitch bend automation, which is the last automation that we haven't seen for this patch yet. So really, to be honest, I don't even know why I ended up doing this, why I felt the need for this to be in the sound, because I can barely hear it over the actual atmosphere that we're creating. Maybe it's just because I created it before I added the reverb and delay, but that is very strange for me, because when I know that I'm making an atmosphere, I tend to sound design into the delay and reverb, because if we turn off all of the delay and reverb in all of these patches, what you'll hear is that it just doesn't sound like atmospheric sound design at all. As you can see here, it just sounds like a few boring sounds placed into the track. So for that reason, you really need the delay and reverb from these sounds. Now again, because these patches are supposed to go on to Patreon, what I probably end up doing is also including the Ableton tracks here. So for those that have M Turbo Reverb, they can actually use the reverb and delay that I provide with them. But really, I also just want to make a couple of more patches so that you have a few patches that actually include the delay and reverb, because I also just want to show how important it is that you design into the delay and reverb. So what I'm first going to do is actually just set up the delay and reverb here. I know that I want to make like a psychedelic sound, so I know 1/8 dotted is going to work very well for that. And then of course, because we're making an atmosphere, we really want that over-exaggerated delay. We have almost 10 seconds of delay time and over 50% of the mix here. And now we can just start doing different things and start sound designing into different things with different ideas. So for example, we could try this shepherd's tone over here, see if that does something interesting on our sound. And you can imagine that if you were to listen for what the atmosphere needs to do without the delay and reverb, it's going to sound totally different. Like you cannot really make an informed judgment on what the sound design needs to do with just this. You need to go into the effects first, and then you can actually understand what the atmosphere is going to do. So in this case, I want to give it a few voices of unison. Let's spread that out nicely with a lot of detune, and let's actually try setting this up by quite a bit, maybe even all the way. There's some interesting sounds that we're getting out of that, but I really just want to remove the low frequencies for now. Okay, that is going to be cool, so let's have this rise up over time, maybe like 4 bars. I'd set it to envelope just to be sure here. trying to get this exactly at 0 here. And I think if we want the whole range to be used, we need 9 voices, so that for every octave in the range, we have 1 voice. That might be cool. Let's add a bandpass to this because it feels quite full in the spectrum, which is not something that I want to go for here. So I'll make another modulation here, and we're just going to give that a different shape so that it is just doing some interesting stuff. Probably want to start a little bit lower and then just have it go up over time, but in an interesting manner. So something like this. Bit less, I think. And there we have a nice atmosphere, which we can put over here to maybe finish off the idea that we have now. I'll also make another one because I want to show you a trick that can replace this part over here with the wavetables. That is just the wavetable loaded being the actual atmosphere. What I sometimes just like to do is take something like a Schimpl over here, somewhere where you can loop sounds, which is also something that we've seen already in this series. But you can use a different type of sound in there, something like an ambient scene, which is what we have over here in the Kashmir pack. Let's go with this one over here because it has a nice mix of clicks and tones to it. And then we'll loop it, turn off snap, and we'll turn the length quite a bit down. We don't have to go so far down that we get like a single tone out of it, but then we can just automate the starting position here. To keep it a little bit more interesting, we can also tune it around a little bit, like this, just going up and down a couple of semitones. And now, again, we'll add our delay and reverb because we really should be sound designing into that. I'm actually going to go with the reverb just from Ableton. And in this case, all we have to do is turn the decay up. Here, we already get a default that is above 50, which is interesting because that is normally not very used. But now with delay and reverb, that is already cool, but we can add a filter to it, like a bandpass filter, like we saw in some of the other atmospheres, so that we can change the tonality over time a little bit more. And again, just moving it up and down over time should generate some cool, interesting sounds and tonalities. Maybe we don't want to go so low in terms of the frequencies that we're filtering. You can see that turning the resonance up over time makes it sound a lot more focused, which is an interesting sound design idea here. Another thing that resonance does for us, as you can hear in this last example, is that it's a nice sweep into this part over here. So as you can hopefully see, there's a lot of different things that you can experiment with. Of course, all 6 of the patches, or maybe 5, depending on how that goes, go up on the Patreon page. So if you want to experiment directly with these patches, then you can do so. And it's a great way to support the channel. But of course, you can always experiment with different sound design techniques in here. Hopefully, I could basically provide you a recipe book of what you should be looking for in these kind of sounds. And then, of course, there's a world of different techniques and ways that you can achieve that once you have a few basic principles and you stick to them, which is, of course, in this case, the delay and reverb being very, very important to the characteristics of this sound. So that's going to be it. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you did by leaving a like, and of course, make sure that you're subscribed. Another way to support the channel is by watching some more of my content. So I'll leave 2 videos up on the screen for you to choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.